You'll carry that stink of the streets with you the rest of your life.
I like the stink of the streets. It makes me feel good. I like the smell of it. It opens up my lungs.
Once Upon a Time in America is not a typical gangster film. It doesn't celebrate power or glorify the violence. Instead, it lingers on the memory and regret that it creates. And at the centre of it all is Robert De Niro's character of Noodles, a man who is both sympathetic and deeply troubling. A man shaped by his childhood, but defined by the choices he makes as an adult. And he's someone who feels human even when he does terrible things. So the question becomes unavoidable. Is Noodles a monster? Noodles starts off as innocent. He and his friends aren't hardened criminals yet. They're kids navigating a harsh world and trying to survive. There's warmth in those scenes, and friendship and loyalty and a sense of optimism. Even when they steal, even when they fight, there's still a softness to them. They feel like boys pretending to be men. And this is important because Sergio Leone wants us to remember this version of Noodles. He wants us to see that he wasn't always the man he becomes, that something was lost along the way. So the film isn't just showing us crime, it's showing us the end of innocence. Noodles appears to carry that innocence longer than the others. He seems quieter and more hesitant, and he doesn't seem driven by power all along. And when he grows up, he's driven by memory and by longing, especially when it comes to his true love, Deborah, played by Elizabeth McGovern. Deborah represents something different. She isn't part of the gang, she isn't part of the streets. She represents a life beyond crime for Noodles. He doesn't just love her, he idolises her. He watches her from a distance, he dreams about her, he imagines a future with her that feels softer and more meaningful. But the tragedy is, Noodles doesn't know how to achieve that. He doesn't know how to express love. Everything he understands about the world is rooted in control, loyalty and possession, because it's all he's ever known. And when he finally gets close to Deborah, that emotional disconnect becomes devastating. This is where we start to ponder who Noodles really is, because instead of reaching out to her with vulnerability, he approaches her with expectation and entitlement, and instead of love he just tries to hold on to her in the only way that he understands, and in doing so he crosses a line that can't be undone. Beneath the nostalgia, beneath the childhood innocence, Noodles has grown into someone who confuses love with ownership. He doesn't open his heart to Deborah, he tries to claim her. And Sergio Leone doesn't romanticise this at all, he presents it as tragic, uncomfortable and deeply sad. This is the moment where Noodles loses something that was essential. Not just Deborah, but the version of himself that might have deserved her. What makes Once Upon a Time in America different from other gangster films is how empty everything feels. There's no triumph, no sense of achievement, no real victory. Even when the gang rises, it just feels temporary and hollow. Noodles never actually seems fully comfortable in this world, but he drifts through it, rather than conquering it. And Robert De Niro plays him that way. He's quiet, observant, distant. And when he participates in violence, there's a sadness behind his eyes. It's as if Noodles already knows that this life won't lead anywhere meaningful, which makes everything that he does feel less like ambition and more like inevitability. And obviously it comes back to the age-old debate of free will versus determination. Could Noodles have chose different after so much of his life just led him down one path? Obviously a lot of people would say yes, absolutely. Some would say it's a little bit more complicated than that, but I don't think either way makes excuses for him. One of the most interesting choices Noodles makes in the film is betraying his friends, because it's not done out of greed, it's not done out of hatred or gain, it's done out of fear. He sees the path they're on and he believes it will destroy them, so he makes a decision that he thinks might save them, even if it means losing them. This is another moment where morality becomes blurred. Is he protecting them, or is he protecting himself? The film never gives a clear answer. Instead it just shows us a man who spends decades haunted by that choice. When Noodles returns as an older man, he's just confronted by ghosts and echoes of the past, and fragments. He walks through spaces that once meant everything, and now feel empty. So this isn't a gangster returning in glory, this is a man confronting the ruin of his own past.
What have you been doing all these years?
You're going to bed early.
So is Noodles a monster? He does terrible things. He hurts people, he betrays his friends, he crosses moral boundaries that can't be defended. And yet Sergio Leone never intends to present him as purely monstrous, because we see his childhood, we see his longing, we see his regret, we see a man who seems to punish himself all the time just through what's going on behind his eyes. He doesn't try and escape what he's done, he lives with it. And that's what makes the film so haunting, because Noodles isn't a monster in the traditional sense. He isn't driven by cruelty, he isn't driven by power. He's driven by weakness, and by fear, and by emotional immaturity. And that actually makes him more human, but also much more tragic. What Sergio Leone does here is just remarkable. He creates a gangster film about terrible people, but he fills it with tenderness, nostalgia and sadness. Even The Godfather, for all its tragedy, still carries a sense of power and myth. But Once Upon a Time in America just feels different. It feels like a dream, it feels like a memory, it feels like a life slipping away. Leone isn't asking us to admire Noodles, he's asking us to reflect on him. To see how innocence disappears, how love becomes possession, how friendship can become betrayal, and how eventually time turns everything into memory. So is he a monster? Maybe, but he's also something more uncomfortable than that. He's human. Once Upon a Time in America doesn't ask us to forgive Noodles, it simply asks us to watch him, to spend time with him, and to feel the weight of a life where everything was lost and never found again.